Well, welcome to a new text session. Today, or this month, we are covering the cause of suffering. And today we're covering chapter 27, section 8, entitled The Cause of Suffering. And just as you all know who have been in these mini courses with us over this year, we've kind of struggled to figure out at the end of each class what the section is that we're covering in the next class. But we're in luck this month because there's 4 sections in a row that are just amazing in terms of the cause of our suffering and helping us identify what is the cause of our suffering. Is it the world out there, or is it what's in our own mind? So we'll go ahead and get started because we do have to end at the very top of the hour. So if you would, please close your eyes and take a deep breath with me. And let's pray. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to come together today as loving friends and mighty companions on this remarkable path of light. We surrender this gathering to you, and we ask that it serve your purposes and be blessed by you. Dear God, may we experience the stately calm within that you have promised, a state of real peace where heaven's joy is fully reflected. May we experience the calm and holy stillness we never left and that never left us. Please take a moment to extend your love and blessing to everyone who is joining us on this call today. Let us all join together in knowing that we go together, you and I. And let us remember that holiness abides in everyone because we are always and forever one with God and one with all of our brothers and sisters without exception in everlasting joy and peace. And we are so grateful this is so. Amen.
Amen. Okay, well, I'll share my notes in just a second. I'm really looking forward to these 4 classes. I don't know if they're a mini course or if they're whatever they are. We do plan these out way in advance. It's just by the time the month rolls around, we've forgotten them. But these 4 sections, and as Emily said, they are consecutive. They are, in my view, some of the most powerful sections in the text. They all speak to sort of this global issue of what's the relationship between the mind and the world. And that's not only in terms of our everyday circumstances, but the origin of the world. They talk about the dream concept in relation to the world. These sections contain the famous line about into eternity we're all as one, there crept a tiny mad idea, at which the Son of God remembered not to laugh. Of course, they talk about the secret of salvation. So I'm hoping to just get you a little bit excited about this month's classes. They will challenge us. They're meant to, but we can still feel the excitement at even that. Okay, so let me share
There's
my
so much
screen.
freedom in this material this month.
There really is. Yeah. Okay. So let's see here.
The mini course is The Secret of Salvation.
Yeah. Oh, I know that. The dangers of cutting and pasting. Okay. So we'll be going through this section pretty much in order, not reading all of it, but what we do read will be basically in order. It's only 6 paragraphs, but it is extremely powerful. Okay, so our demented version of salvation, and that's the quote from paragraph 1, is that we are innocent because the world is the cause of our suffering. So paragraph 1 says, suffering is an emphasis upon all that the world has done to injure you. So our suffering, it contains within itself this emphasis of what the world's done to us. Here is the world's demented version of of salvation clearly shown. Like to a dream of punishment, in which the dreamer is unconscious of what brought on the attack against himself, he sees himself attacked unjustly and by something not himself. Now, if you think about if you were having a dream of punishment, and sometimes we do have dreams where, like, the police are after us or something like that. In the dream, you aren't thinking this whole thing is coming out of my mind. You're thinking this is all being done to me and it's being done unfairly. To continue, he is the victim of this something else, a thing outside himself, for which he has no reason to be held responsible. So none of this stuff that's happening to us seems to be our responsibility. The world is just doing it to us. He must be innocent because he knows not what he does, but what is done to him. Yet is his own attack upon himself apparent still, for it is he who bears the suffering. Now, this sentence, it contains a view. This is like a preview of a view he'll develop more fully in a few paragraphs. But the idea is that our mind is our mind. What happens inside our mind, we have power over. So if we're the one bearing the suffering, then that suffering is taking place in our mind. We are ultimately in control of our own mind, whether we think that way or not. So the suffering must be a case of us attacking ourselves. Okay, and he cannot escape because its source is seen outside himself. If the suffering is coming at you from the outside, what can you do? You can't control the whole world. So it feels like you can't escape. So in this view, well, let me just go ahead and get to the bullet points here. So doesn't this describe how we feel? Now, I know as good Course in Miracles students, we want to say, I don't think that way. But if you watch your thoughts, if you watch your speech, we do think this way. Everyone thinks this way. We constantly see our suffering as coming from how the world treats us, from conditions, circumstances, events, and I think more than anything else from other people. And the fact that our suffering is coming at us from the outside, somehow in our minds, that proves we're innocent. And that innocence feels like salvation. We have accepted as, mature grown-ups that we're not going to keep the world from treating us the way it does. But within this difficult human condition, we can still seek a kind of salvation and feeling like, yeah, we're the innocent ones. And so much of our class today is about just getting in touch with this dynamic within us and how deep it runs. How much as we, if you ever find yourself complaining about what happened to you today or recently, which almost all of us do, unless we're those rare, really kindly grandparents, while you complain, note within the complaining process that good feeling of, this shows how innocent I am. This shows that I'm the innocent one. While you're engaged in that, there's this underlying drumbeat in your own mind, and it's in the minds of people listening to you that you're the innocent one.
You always say, like, unless you're like those grandparents, and I have to laugh because my grandparents were the biggest complainers ever. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But this paragraph is so powerful if we really take it in. I remember when you and I were planning to do the workshop on projection, and kind of tongue in cheek said, let's call it Maybe It's You. And then we decided that title was so good that we actually did end up calling the workshop Maybe It's You. And one thing that I remember about that is the ways to identify when you're in projection is if you're always right, the other person is always wrong, you're always the righteous one. And what I can't quite wrap my head around is why and how we can go through life. We all know those people, maybe we are those people who are never wrong. Never wrong. It's always the other person.
Yeah.
And when that's like, we need to flag that in our own mind, that when we're in that place where the other person has no shred of being right, maybe it's you. Maybe you're the one who's misperceiving in that moment. And
Yeah.
we're just not very good at that.
We're not very good at that. And what I find with so many spiritual people and course students is our spiritual teachings give us more ammo for that perspective. Rather than helping us question that perspective, they just give us ammo in the hands of that perspective,
Right.
right?
Every feeling is allowed, every feeling is justified.
And you're projecting and you're doing this and you're in your ego, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Jesus, however, says that we are attacking ourselves, and he'll develop this further later on. Since the mind is in charge of itself, if we are suffering, we must be the cause of that. I mentioned that already. He said this is like one big dream of punishment. And if you're being chased in dreams or punished in dreams, your mind is doing it all. The whole dream comes from your mind, but you're not conscious of this fact. So we'll get more into that. What I want us to just get in touch with at the beginning here is how much it's like it's an addiction to seeing the cause of our suffering out there and not in here.
Yeah. It's always them, but the reframe is maybe as you.
Yeah. Okay. So we can escape this suffering, but we have to go beyond the obvious and see the problem as it really is. The cause of our suffering, it seems so obvious. But as long as we see that cause as outside of us, we can't escape. Okay. Jesus, however, says we can escape if we will see the problem differently. So, paragraph 2 says, now you are being shown you can escape. All that is needed is you look upon the problem as it is and not the way that you have set it up. How could there be another way to solve a problem which is very simple, but has been obscured by heavy clouds of complication, which were made to keep the problem unresolved? Without the clouds, the problem will emerge in all its primitive simplicity. Notice he has said simple there. He said it's simplicity here. Later in the same paragraph, it's not quoted here, he calls the problem simple again. So 3 times in one paragraph. Now, that's important because it does all seem so complicated. It seems like there are a million causes of suffering out there. Most require their own complex methods of solution. Many of them are basically impossible to solve, right? For instance, we're going to age, our bodies are going to break down. Every one of these bodies is eventually going to cease to function. And there are all kinds of problems like that in the world. And even the attempts to solve them can be very complicated. I'm reminded, for some reason, this got so much press recently where a late night talk show host was reported on social media by a restaurant owner as throwing a fit over, I think, egg yolk getting into his wife's, no, egg white getting into his wife's egg yolk omelet or something like that, and just like threw a fit. Like, if you can throw a fit over that, how many things in life are there that are going to be vexing you? So it's a very complex picture in our view. But was that complex picture manufactured by us and manufactured to keep the problem unresolved? Are we willing to see a whole different picture and a super simple picture? You'd think we'd want a simple picture, but the simple picture is about changing our own mind. Chances are we're going to be somewhat reluctant to hear it.
I would take your example about the egg yolk and go to the other extreme where people will say, well, what do we do? About the situation in Ukraine? How are we to hold the view of Putin in and his actions? And the same, it's the simplicity is that the same rules apply. The talk
Yeah,
show host is a
yeah,
child of God, so is Putin, and doesn't mean that we don't take action in the world of form. But as far as how we look at things, there is no difference. There's no degrees in how we see each other.
And we know that as course students, but I think we don't think of that as the solution. It's kind of part of a whole mix of solutions. It's almost like it's seasoning for the dish.
And yet it is simple
Yeah,
at the end of the day.
and it's the whole dish. Okay, so our quote unquote reasoning. Now remember that in the course, reason is a super positive word. It's so positive that the course says the ego is literally incapable of reason, doesn't even know it exists. Okay, so when he's talking about false reasoning, he puts it in quotes. Isn't that interesting? Because one of the things that we spiritual students all agree on is that reason is the devil, right? So our reasoning, which says that everything about us is caused from without, makes no sense. So this is paragraph 3 now. You can see we're going in order. The reasoning by which the world is made, on which it rests, by which it is maintained, is simply this. You are the cause of what I do. Your presence justified my wrath, and you exist and think apart from me. While you attack, I must be innocent. And what I suffer from is your attack. Now, that all seems pretty reasonable to us, but then he says, no one who looks upon this quote unquote reasoning exactly as it is could fail to see it does not follow, and it makes no sense. So we need to look at this reasoning. Now, of course, in the world, all of that seems ironclad and unquestionable, but we need to ask the questions that I think are fairly obvious here. Okay, so on the left, I have the quotes from that paragraph. And on the right, I have what I think are the obvious questions. Some of them are a bit less obvious, some are a bit more obvious. So, you are the cause of what I do. Now, we think that all the time. We say, I had no choice but to do this, given what the other person had done. But seriously, do you move my lips? Do you move my hands? Do you control my body for me? Am I not the one who is in charge of my own actions? That one's an easy one to question. Even though, having been aware of this line in the course for a long time, I've watched how much all of us, myself included, talk and think like I had to do that because of what they did. Okay, so your presence justified my wrath. And the obvious question is, do you really have the power to make me feel wrathful? Since that feeling is in my own mind, isn't it my choice? Don't I have the ultimate say on what takes place in my mind? The next one I think is the hardest one to just poke a hole in quickly. And that is, you exist and think apart from me. And he'll reference this later on in separation from your brother, he says in the final paragraph. So the questions are, am I sure that you're separate? Could I simply have a need for you to be separate? I mean, how do I really know you're separate from me? Maybe you feel so separate to me because there's a need in me for that to be the case. Okay, next one is, while you attack, I must be innocent. Now think about this. Innocence is an attribute of us. Either we have it or we don't, or we have some measure of it. Wouldn't my innocence be an attribute in me? How can my innocence lie in your actions? Isn't that a strange view when you think about it? Even though that's central to this whole thing, right? While you attack, I must be innocent. Finally, and what I suffer from is your attack. Again, as we said in relation to the first paragraph, isn't suffering an experience within my mind? And am I not in charge of my mind? So the point of these questions is to carry out what Jesus said. If you really look at these statements on the left, you'll see they make no sense. But it's to puncture like the balloon of this assumption we have that goes so deep that Our feelings, our thoughts, our actions, and even our characteristics are at the mercy of what happens out there. It's done to us.
I like what you said about the middle one. You exist and think apart from me, and asking us to question the need in us for other people to be separate. And part of that need is to give us something to attack. And somehow the ego in us likes that, wants that. And just looking at that and looking at the power that we give other people over what we think and how we behave is a really valuable exercise. I wish this were more of a workshop so we could explore all the ways in which that shows up in our lives.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. If we could really like play this out in form exercises in the form of discussion. In this means there's a lot of reasons the course gives for why we want to see other people as outside. But in this section, it's specifically like because we want somebody to blame. We want them to be the guilty party so we can be innocent. And that's such a powerful motivation. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years as a course student is how, and I say this from time to time because it's such a striking observation, is how even the people we consider the worst of the worst, the most dangerous strong men on the world stage, the most dangerous criminals who are going to trial or behind bars, if you hear them talk, they're always innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a rare case where someone says, yeah, I've had to face myself and oh my God, I don't like what I see. They're always innocent. So even the really bad people in their mind, they've got a halo over their head because of the bad guys out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm thinking about the message of the crucifixion section where Jesus says, you accept your misperceptions as justifications for your anger. And somehow he says, look what happened to me. And I wasn't angry. And you are angry for, was it like far less, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's what we do. We accept that the other person is to blame. That's the misperception. We use it to justify our anger and then our attack on them. And
And we get to be innocent.
and we get to be innocent. And the whole power in this, I was saying before, there's so much power in these sections. The power is if you recognize that pattern, you can break it. And when you break it, then things improve within your own mind and within your own relationships and so on.
Yeah. And I think there's soft forms of breaking it, and there's sort of harder, firmer forms of breaking it. Like one form is just like be willing to admit when you were wrong, right? I think a more extreme form is to police your mind so that you never, and police your speech so you never entertain that somebody else is the cause of your pain, and so that you never think that your innocence is established by their guilt. You know, like, can we take a consistent stand?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, that's not to belittle the willingness to say, I was wrong, I made a mistake, you know, that was me. Um, that's huge, right? So many of us can't even get that far. But we've got to also go all the way and just take a consistent stand throughout every day. Okay. So doing our part seems to be being the one that everyone else can blame. I could have left this out, but it occupies basically a whole paragraph in a 6-paragraph section. So I wanted to draw this out briefly. So in paragraph 4, he says, each one thinks that if he does his part, if he takes responsibility and does his part, the condemnation of the world will rest on him. And it is this that he perceives to be his part in its deliverance. This is all going to make sense. It may already. Vengeance must have a focus. Otherwise, is the avenger's knife in his own hand and pointed to himself. And he must see it in another hand if he would be a victim of attack he did not choose, and thus he suffers from the wounds a knife he does not hold has made upon himself. So the idea here is that this thought is living in all of us, right? I have been made to suffer. Then that calls for vengeance. I must get back the person who did this. But then what if I did this? What if I caused my own suffering? Now the knife is in my own hand, pointed to myself. I caused my own suffering. Now I guess I need to get vengeance on myself. And we think, what an awful thought. I need to see the knife in someone else's hand. I need to have them as the focus of my vengeance. And so that leads to this part that is the heading here, which is, okay, so everyone's hoping to see the knife in someone else's hand, right? We all are hoping to blame somebody else. If I step up and say, hey, I'm going to do my part, I'm going to take responsibility, everyone's going to say, oh, now you can be the scapegoat for all of us, right? We can all see the knife in your hand, and now we all will be saved. We'll be innocent. Thank you so very much. And I think we sense that this idea or this impulse is out there. So who wants to stand up and say, you know, I take responsibility. I'll do my part. I feel like the whole thing's going to come crashing down on us. And it is not that hard to get yourself in a situation where everyone's saying that, where everyone's saying, yep, it was you. We all knew it. And wow, we feel so much cleaner ourselves now. So I don't think we need to belabor this, but I think that thought is inside of us.
Robert, how does this connect with, it seems to me like whenever we talk about that, the ego in us that wants to attack, there's always the comment that my ego just attacks me. I don't connect with attacking other people, but boy, do I connect with my ego coming down on me. Where does that fit into this paragraph?
Well, I think my experience is I've known a lot of really innocent, seemingly really innocent, gentle, kind, naturally, caring people in my life. And I always think, okay, so do they just not fit the mold that the course is talking about throughout, where the ego in us is made of attack? And what I find is that if you listen to those people enough, you realize they've got the same stuff living in them. And they just the denial is thick enough that they don't really hear the words that they themselves are saying, words that do assign blame, words that do point the finger. And so that's been my experience. Part of me hopes that the course's thought system is not shown to be wrong and to have exceptions. And then part of me is hoping that I've at last found the person who truly is innocent and doesn't attack. And so far, and I'm logging a lot of years now, so far, what I found is that all you got to do is listen long enough. And we've all got this thought system. It shows up right in our words. So I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
No, we have a lot to.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so on to paragraph 5, and I guess we're going to kind of get into 6 here as well. Rather than looking at all the outer effects, we must look at their underlying cause, our need to see evil in the world. So what he's saying is that need in us to see the evil out there, not in here, is what actually produced the world itself. So it's not like the world showed up full of all kinds of attacking behavior, and then we decided, hey, it would be a good scapegoat so that we don't have to feel guilty. It's that our need to see the scapegoats out there is what produced the world. And I think of that as being on 2 different levels, and both levels, each level is important. The one level is that produced the world itself. The course is saying the world is a dream of punishment. It is our dream. It's a collective dream. And I think that's really important, but it's still a dream. And then the other level is that need in us to see the evil out there produces how we see the world. So we not only are faced with a world that is full of attacking behaviors objectively, right? We all can see them, but we also perceive an extra layer of attack that we don't even need to see. We just have the need inside of us, and somebody else who was perhaps a more impartial observer, they wouldn't see attack there. So there's both levels, the actual world and the world as we perceive it. Okay, so paragraph 5 starts out, he has just ended paragraph 4 by saying, and thus he suffers from the wounds a knife he does not hold has made upon himself. And then paragraph 5 says this, the need to suffer from a knife held by someone else, is the purpose of the world he sees. And looked at thus, the world provides the means by which this purpose seems to be fulfilled. So the whole purpose of the world we see is to provide evidence that the knife is in somebody else's hand. Then paragraph 6 starts out this way. Forget not that the witness to the world of evil, and the witness to the world of evil is all those knives out there, okay? The outer knives that seem to cause our suffering. Cannot speak except for what has seen a need for evil in the world. It's a bit of a convoluted sentence, but what he's saying is those witnesses out there, all those knives out there, what they really testify to is that thing in us that has a need to see evil in the world. And that's the thing we never talk about. Although it's interesting, the class we had 2 classes ago on the light you bring, which is chapter 25, section 4, it was talking about our rejoicing in seeing sin and suffering out there. So very similar concept. So rather than pointing at all the outer effects, all the knives we imagine are out there, all the knives that are actually out there, physically speaking, we need to go deeper to the real cause, which is the purpose in us that we want the world to fulfill. And that purpose in us is our need to see evil in the world. That's the real cause. That thing we talked about in paragraph 1 of, yeah, we feel saved when they're the bad guy and we're the innocent one. There's a need in us. We want them to be the bad guy. We're waiting for them to show evidence of their evil. That's what we need to focus our attention on.
There's that line in chapter 2 where it says external conditions are caused by the thoughts of many, not all of whom are pure of heart as yet. And as you're talking, I think about the number of times that quote specifically comes to my mind every day. You pick up the news and that quote comes to mind. And it never occurred to me before just now that I think, yeah, those people who aren't pure of heart yet.
Yeah, those impure hearts out there.
Those impure hearts out there, creating those
Yeah.
external conditions under which I suffer.
Right.
And it's just, yeah, we have to be aware of that in us. We really do want to put the boogeyman out there and not look at the ways in which we have that need within ourselves because we want to be innocent. Yeah.
It's like there's something in us that does a little silent celebration at having identified the bad guys. And we need to look at that.
We do, because it's killing us. It's literally killing us.
Yeah. Okay, final category here is our need to see evil outside of us in an external brother is the source of our guilt. So just to restart paragraph 6 here and read a couple of lines further. Forget not that the witness to the world of evil cannot speak except for what has seen a need for evil in the world. So again, the external witnesses, they don't really testify to how much evil there is in the world. They're really testifying to that thing in us that needs to see the evil out there. And now the key lines. And this is where your guilt was first beheld, in the need to see the evil out there. And separation from your brother was the first attack upon yourself begun. Now, it can seem like in separation from your brother, it's kind of thrown in from left field. But I think what he's saying is, in seeing your brother outside of you so that he could be the source of your suffering, the external source of your suffering, that's where the attack upon yourself was first begun. And clearly, your guilt was first beheld. The attack upon yourself was first begun. He's intending us to hear those as the same idea. So the idea here, and it's not so obscure or mystifying, is that we started attacking ourselves with guilt when something in us needed to place blame out there, needed to see an evil brother separate from ourselves, needed to see a world that was full of bad guys and was the source of our suffering. And I don't think that's so hard to understand. While you're doing the little end zone victory dance, when you've caught the bad guy out there, doesn't something in your mind look back at yourself and say, what is wrong with you? And so oddly enough, that's how we're trying to find our innocence, right? The worse they are out there, the worse they've treated us, the more innocent we feel. And yet in that whole thing is the cause of our guilt, that need to like feast upon their evilness is the cause of our guilt. So our very attempt to feel innocent is what causes our guilt. Like, surely we don't want to do something that completely backfires.
Eileen is saying this is bleak. And yes and no. Yes, in the sense of we're being asked to look at something that we would prefer not to look at. It's hard.
Yeah.
And it can be dark. But at the same time, as we've been saying throughout, there's real power and liberation in this as well. This is spiritual advancement as far as I'm concerned, you know? When we can really understand how to root out the ego within ourselves and see each other differently and not look to displace our blame onto other people, then we can really get somewhere in our relationships and by extension in our world. This is a real recipe for healing that's desperately needed.
Absolutely. And the game where I'm going to feel innocent because I've identified who the bad guys are out there, we never really win that game. There is a certain temporary relief. It's true. We do kind of get a certain high from it, but there's a sourness in the middle of the high, right? Like, what's wrong with me that I want to see? I want to see bad guys. I want to see my brother as evil. Like, there is a pain and a darkness, even in the midst of the joy that comes from our little celebration. And I think we need to start thinking like, okay, yes, we do need to identify, like, if some corporation is causing a mess in the world, we've got to identify that and take measures. But we are only going to bring salvation to the world. We are only going to feel saved if we seek salvation in looking beyond what's done on the outside to the innocence in them. Right? We're only going to find salvation if we're not trying to find innocence at their expense. So there's two levels. We have to do the certain amount of policing, but real salvation will never come on that level.
Yeah, I think your chart is very powerful. The chart above that comes directly from, what was that, paragraph 2?
3.
Where if we just recognize that the other person is not the cause of what we do, that their behaviors don't justify our wrath, that they don't think and exist apart from us, that we can't off put our guilt onto them and think that we're innocent and so on. And there's, if we can just get that piece of it, then we can really unlock this section.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. I was trying to think there's another key part of this, and it's this, that we need to realize we are responsible, right? For our actions, for our feelings, for all of it, for our suffering. And in that responsibility, if we use it to see innocence, we're free.
Yeah. And that's why that line from the message of the crucifixion is stuck in my head. It's we misperceive all the time, and then we use that as justification for our anger and justification for our attack. And we really got to interrupt that cycle, or
Yeah.
we won't change anything externally or internally, for that matter.
Yeah.
So, okay, let me get into the
Yeah.
chat
What's the
here to
chat looking
see
like?
if we Kathy says, touche, that's me also. It's great to be called out. Sometimes I get it. Most of the time it's them. Yeah. Eileen saying this
Yeah.
explains our politics. Rosalie saying that our disagreements must be interesting to witness, meaning you and me.
You're projecting.
It's your fault. No, it's your fault. um, Mary is saying, does this explain our fascination with murders and thrillers in books,
Mm,
movies, and TV? What do you think?
I think so. If you see what drives so much of our, sense of entertainment, whether it's fiction or sports or politics, it's identify the bad guy and see him soundly defeated. We love that whole template. So
Yeah.
like, why are we so driven to identify with a hero who's going to defeat the bad guy and then he like wipes the floor with the bad guy? We love that pattern.
Yeah, you've said before we can identify the good guy just based on who's wearing the cape, but the person who's wearing the cape is oftentimes just as violent, if not more, than the quote unquote bad guy. So what are we really celebrating?
Well, what one thing we love in the whole good guy, theme is somebody who gets to do violence and be righteous at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's the perfect combination. It's like chocolate and peanut butter.
Oh, this is interesting. Pam says, being an ex-Catholic, sometimes I think bad things happen to me because it's a way to be punished for prior wrongdoing that I feel guilty about. Now, earlier I was saying, gosh, you were saying we push out this blame onto others so that we don't feel it ourselves. And this I think is an explanation for that. We think that if we're the bad guy, then we're going to be punished by God or other people. And so that's a real motivation for trying to off put that blame onto other people. Yeah,
Right.
thanks for
And then as you
for
off
sharing.
put it, you are blaming, you feel more guilty, and the whole thing just keeps going. Actually, in the next section, as well as class 4, the final section, they're going to talk about how the bad stuff in our lives manifests from our sense of guilt.
Yeah, and this is also where just bad theology can get us in trouble. When you understand that God isn't just eagerly waiting to pour his wrath on you, that God sees you as innocent and will not ever change his perception of you, then all of this guilt and whatnot can melt away if you let that message in. And then as you realize that God doesn't see you as guilty, you're more willing to see other people as guilty because you're not trying to to get out of your own punishment. And so if we can just let in a new view of God and a new view of each other, then maybe we won't be so willing to hold on to all of this
Yeah.
righteous anger and justification for our attack.
Yeah, absolutely. But we need to realize it takes a lot of mind training because these impulses go very deep.
So George says, when we are suffering, for instance, with physical pain, how are we to think of that?
Well, the course has lots and lots of teachings about that, but one of the main teachings is really implicit in the section. The section is basically saying that we don't need to see anything outside of our mind as the cause of what we feel. And so the course in many places talks about, a refusal to see the body as having the ability to cause what we feel. Now, for most of us being, given that we're so identified with the body, it does seem to directly cause sensations in us. But even while we feel the sensations, we don't need to add the extra layer of meaning onto them that we usually add about how this is so awful, about how my body is kind of victimizing me. We can see it as the course says, something quite apart from us. And I think that does make the experience of pain less.
So one last question before we go into the exercise. This is from Linda. She says, doesn't much of our projection come from subconscious guilt? We perceive people as evil without being aware that that's our motivation. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think we're aware. I think that we're aware of the tiniest tip of the iceberg when it comes to our guilt. And so that's why we need these teachings, is to bring to awareness something that we have managed to keep obscure and submerged.
Yeah, and Jim said this is, yeah, good point, Jim. No one wants to change. If the problem is out there, then we don't have to. I
Yeah,
think that's a really important point. We say we want to change, but when it comes right down to it, we don't really want to change. Change is very hard. And so if the problem is them and we're the innocent ones, then they're the ones who have to change, not us. And
right.
so it goes.
And why don't they? What's wrong with them?
Right. Exactly.
Back in our study of the psychotherapy supplement earlier this year, there was this great teaching there that, yeah, patients come into therapy with a certain willingness to change, but they want to change the superficial stuff. They don't want to change the real stuff. So we'll change, like we'll acquire confidence in ourselves and we'll boost our self-esteem and we'll do all these, we'll form new habits for success. But the deeper kind of dynamics he's talking about here in this section, that's stuff that we don't want to change.
Yeah. You know that one of my favorite political cartoons is the politician at the stump with a huge crowd, and he says, who wants change? And everybody has two hands up. And then he says, who wants to change? And nobody has their hands up.
Yeah.
And that's reflective of how we are.
Okay,
All
the
right.
exercise?
Yep.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I'm not going to put this one on the screen. This is really just going to be personal reflection on what we've been talking about, applying it to ourselves directly. Okay, so please go ahead and close your eyes and relax. And prepare yourself to be just as honest with yourself as you can be. Notice how much emphasis you place on the people and things outside of you that, in your eyes, cause your suffering. For instance, go through a mental list of such things outside of you that seem to cause you various forms of suffering: anxiety, worry, anger, pain, grief, depression. Go through a list of things that seem to cause all that have been recurring in your thoughts or in your speech to others. And just name a few of these things one by one in your mind. Now be honest with yourself. Isn't it obvious in your mind that they are the cause of your suffering? And that were they changed, you would be happy. Also, as you focus on them as the cause, and you might pick a particularly stark example in your life, as you focus on it as causing your suffering, isn't there a silent feeling of innocence in yourself? And isn't that feeling of innocence precious to you? Isn't it a version of salvation? Doesn't it hold you up throughout your days? Yet ask yourself, can someone else really be the cause of things in your own mind? Can someone else, and again, think of an example, really be the cause of how you feel? Can someone else really be the cause of what you do? Can their actions really be the cause of your innocence? Now realize you can completely escape the situation in which your suffering appears forced on you, but only if you see the problem differently. You'll have to look beyond all those outer effects to their underlying cause. And that cause is your own need to see evil in the world. Can you feel that need in you? Your need to see the knife in someone else's hand. Can you feel yourself rejoicing when you see the evil out there, the knife out there, the responsibility out there? But as you see that need for you to find the evil in the world, how do you feel seeing that need in you? How do you honestly feel about that? Don't you feel bad that that's in you? Don't you feel disappointed in yourself? don't you feel some sort of guilt? Now just take a moment and take full responsibility for your own mind. Realize nothing out there can make you suffer. Realize the answer lies in you making a fundamentally different choice. All right. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Robert. I mentioned that we do have to run fairly soon, but happy to take a question from anyone if you have one. I don't see any hands.
Or any
raised.
ahas that may have
Yeah.
come about.
The space is yours for anything that you want to share.
Patty?
Okay.
I just put something in the chat that works well for me. When I find fault with a person or I am angry with a person, I center myself and I say, you are spirit, whole and innocent. All is forgiven and released. And that releases me and releases them as well.
That's great. It's great to have, those are great lines. It's great to have lines that work for you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Anita and then Esther.
Hi. I guess I just wanted to make a comment that guilt for me is really a bottomless pit. So it seems like that anyway. Even when I don't attack or see other people as attacking me, I feel a certain amount of guilt just for the fact that I don't suffer. And then that I sort of incur suffering because of the guilt that I feel over not having to suffer, if that makes any sense.
So you'll use any excuse.
Yeah, it's like my ego can figure it. It doesn't matter. I mean, I can always find something to feel deeply guilty about. And
But
I know.
But that can the awareness of your guilt, not being aware of it and just kind of saying, well, it's just justified. But being aware of it is such a plus because so many people have very little awareness of it. And then the cause and effect relationship the course is counting on, where we see how our own attack thoughts and attacking behaviors lead to guilt and how painful. I mean, guilt's an awful feeling. Once we see that cause and effect cycle, that can power our way out. When we don't know the guilt's there, we're at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, and I feel I feel that I've progressed at least in that way. But yeah, there is this sort of deep-seated belief that everything's going to even out, and that if I'm not suffering now, something else will happen that evens out so that I suffer the amount that I'm supposed to suffer, whatever that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get
It's like
that.
I can't be happy, you know.
I
can't
get
be
that,
happy.
Anita. I think Robert could
Okay.
probably relate less to that. I don't think your mind kind of works that way, but I totally understand. It's like if I don't punish myself for this thing, then it's like I'm accepting the punishment and causing it, because if I do it, then at least I'm still suffering, and that's good, right? Quote unquote good.
It's protection against future suffering.
And what yes, totally understand that. Robert,
Yeah,
do
it's
you
messed
have
up, but I'm just comment. I know it's messed up.
Robert, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, the course, I mean, first of all, it sounds kind of oddly Catholic to me. And the
Protestant
course,
too.
a Protestant, okay. The course says that we make ourselves sick from that very mindset. We think if we punish our body, obviously it's unconscious, but if we punish our body, that will
Mhm.
mitigate the punishment of God. So he knows we have that thought system inside of us.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Anita.
thanks for your honest sharing.
And Esther?
So I just wanted to say, just very simply, bless them and change me. And it just works all the time. It's very simple.
Mm.
But
Mhm. I like
reacting
that.
to Anita's comment, I mean, the traditions of the world, suffering was the way to get into heaven. That was the way. If you weren't suffering, you weren't, making progress. So that's that whole mindset that has to be changed and undone. And here with the course, we have the tools, with the help of the Holy Spirit, to really, undo that thinking, each day in the practice. So thank you for this wonderful teaching. This is wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Esther. And I'm glad you said that because that clues me into the fact that I think what both Anita and you have been talking about is implicitly in our section. Because in the section it says, well, you think that if you do your part, you're going to be the big scapegoat. You're going to be paying for it all, right? And that's essentially what you two, I think, are talking about. So we have this view that we better keep pushing it out there, because if we're really good, it means we got to take it upon ourselves and be
Yeah.
the one who pays for everyone's sins.
And Eileen was saying I was raised that sacrifice is good and suffering is a gift to God. Yeah, this is the kind of theology that we just need to kind of uproot within our mind. God does not want our suffering.
Yeah, if a parent was like that, what would you say about that parent? Like a
Mhm.
parent saying, I really need you to suffer as a gift to me. I mean,
Mhm.
what an awful thing.
Okay, off we go. Thank you so much for being here in class. Our next section is the chapter 27, section 9, the dreamer of the dream. So we'll be
Awesome section.
covering that one. Yeah, there's so many awesome sections in chapter 27, but we'll be covering the dreamer of the dream next week. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Thank you.